All right, welcome to another episode of the Manaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Traplin, and I have with me one Molly Zeff. She is one of the two co-founders of Flying Leap Games, and she is here to tell us all about her very interesting and unique way of getting into the publishing business, getting into the games business, and her experience visiting a crazy amount of game stores. So I'm just going to hand it over to Molly and let her tell us all about who she is and how she got started, and we're just going to jump into the conversation. So thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. This is awesome. Very exciting, very excited to share a hopefully unique angle today to both publishing and to just, what I've seen in terms of what makes a successful store, which we'll get into later. As Tom said, I run Flying Leap Games, and I think a big part of what we have done that is unique is we got into retail really early and in a number of countries. And, we'll get into some of the details later, but I heard at some point in the last couple of years that what I was doing in terms of visiting stores, no one else was doing it, sounded like, at least at the scale. So as Tom mentioned, I visited a lot of game stores. I estimate it's around 275 game and toy stores, actually. A couple bookstores in there, a few bookstores, and always in person to these stores that are mostly in the US, but also all in a big circle around the UK, and then a couple big cities and other places in Canada as well. So that's a lot of the way we've gotten into retail, and I realized I had something to teach before last year's GAMA, the Game Manufacturers Association Expo. So in 2020, about just over a year ago, actually, I did a workshop for small and new publishers on how to get into retail and shared 9 ways. So there are other ways we've done it, mostly though GAMA, attending GAMA, and also, visiting the stores in person. So not that I want to jump into that too much right now, but that's a big way that we've gotten into stores, and I can share some stories and fun pieces later about how we got into other countries as well.
That is definitely something I want to talk about. And before we go into all of that, I do want to know about how you got into the publishing business, or more specifically, why you decided to get into the publishing business. Because of all the things you can do, right? Why do this?
Sure, that's a funny story, and actually, this has been a really big transition, or was a big transition for me. So I was working in nonprofits and social enterprises for about 8 or 9 years, focused on market-based solutions to poverty, basically supporting people who are lower income in, getting jobs or learning, learning a trade, or just getting more money for what they did. That was in fair trade for many years. I worked in fair trade coffee, chocolate, and tea. And while working in fair trade, I realized that I wasn't really using my creative side much. And I have a really strong creative, quirky side to just who I am, to my personality. So back in about 2010, and this will probably amuse you and some listeners, I initially thought, okay, I'm going back to business school in 3 to 5 years. I need to either write a book or invent something to make money to pay for it. And so, both of those would use my creative side and also make a lot of money, right? Which is funny in part because people do not go into games to make a lot of money usually, although maybe they have that idea in mind. So what happened is in 2010, around my 26th birthday, I started writing a book on how to fail well, because I feel like I'm pretty good at failing and then turning it into a success, or, turning it into something positive. And I think I got about a page in and realized that I needed to fail a whole lot more, maybe wait till my 50s when I'd failed more to write that book. Well, shortly after that, sometime that summer, I suppose, I decided I really wanted to invent a game. And I was specifically inspired, other than spending, years playing games, specifically, often party games or like strategy games, I was inspired by the book Would You Rather. Now, probably some listeners out there are familiar with the Would You Rather books. It's also a game, but I was most familiar with the book Would You Rather, a bright pink book with big green letters, and it's about whether you would rather have this absurd scenario or this absurd scenario, and you have to, pick one when someone poses it to you. So it's read like a game, and so the classic example I like giving that we often provide on our website is, would you rather have a ketchup dispensing navel belly button or a pencil sharpening nostril. And there are lots of more risque ones or some really funny ones in there. And I thought, gosh, people are paid to sit around and be weird all day. I just could picture men. For some reason, I pictured it being more men sitting around making up funny situations and just being weird all day and being paid to be weird for a living. And I thought I could be weird for a living. So that thought and that book specifically and the idea of putting people in weird situations led to the inspiration for this first game, Wing It. If people aren't able to see and want to look it up on the website, it's flyingleapgames.com. Has our game Wing It with the penguin flying with a jetpack on the front. And the idea of Wing It, I think, just came out of Would You Rather, really, that, you are put in these ridiculous, weird situations and you have to use random, funny resources to tell a story about how you'll get out of that situation. So there's always a funny problem in a situation. And so I came up with that idea of using 3 resources to get out of a situation. And I called my friend John, very quirky, smart friend from my youth. We've been friends now for about 25 years. I called him out of the blue in Boston, where we were both living in that August. And I said, John, you want to invent a game with me? I told him the idea, and he said, sure. Neither of us had any experience, mind you. So, I had got to start somewhere, right? And so John and I began meeting regularly. It would be like every few weeks, sometimes a little more often, sometimes very infrequently, just spouting out funny ideas for situations and resources for an hour or so. And so that initial game development took quite a while, but that was how we developed the first game, is just us meeting up at one of our kitchen tables and just saying funny, strange ideas to each other. And that's how I'm getting a little beyond myself, but that's how I initially got into it. Was I thought, I need a way to pay for business school, and I wanted to use my creative side.
I like how you wanted to create a business to pay for business school.
Right.
Maybe not in that exact order, but it's kind of funny how that sort of came about that way.
That is actually an irony I never thought of. It's a good point. And to be really frank and open about this, we definitely started playtesting the summer before business school, and I worked on it during business school. So we didn't actually launch the company, as in incorporate, until summer 2017.
So what was when I was a youth in my childhood, I liked making games myself. That's one of the reasons I got into Magic. It's one of the reasons I kind of got into this whole world of games, right? I love making games, and it's something I always wanted to do when I grew up. So the whole game design, the publishing side of things has always been a really interesting side of the business to me. So hearing your experience of just like, I had this great idea, and then I just wanted to make it happen, and we just started exploring, the concepts that kind of create the game, right? The rules, the individual elements of the game, and that sort of thing. And then you take that and turn it into an actual physical thing. I find that process very interesting, and I can definitely appreciate the fact that you took it from just this idea that just seemed like this would be cool, and you turned it into a real product that has been very popular. Is incredible. So once you had this idea and you've got the elements and all the pieces, and you kind of have, okay, this is the game, this is Wing It, this is what we've got. At what point did it become like a real physical, tangible object, and what was the journey to get there?
Wow, that's a big question. Okay, give me a moment here. So once we had several hundred cards, a few hundred cards, we were not entirely sure when to start testing, but John felt like, we had enough in the summer of 2014, right after I had applied for business school, actually. And so I had some time when I was still in the same town that we could start playtesting. I thought, okay, he's probably right, so I went with it. He operates on instinct much more than I do, which is helpful, I think, for the business. We operate a little bit differently. And we began playtesting it. We literally, in terms of the physical object, I guess that's the thing I want to make sure listeners know, that you often just start with a scrappy printed version from Staples, for example. And so I'm pretty sure it was Staples or some local printer, maybe Gnome Copies, something like that in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we printed a physical version. I still have one of those early versions. It's kind of cute to look back and say, oh, look, it's, literally black words on white pieces of paper, just printed out and then cut at Staples.
Those humble beginnings.
The
humble beginnings.
Humble beginnings. There you go. Yeah, every game begins like that. Now I have less, a little bit less self-conscious about how game looks early on, but it's funny to look back at that early stage game and see, our current games coming out look like the same thing, right? So basically, following that playtesting and some playtesting during business school, mostly John, I think, is the one who began research on manufacturers. And we ended up going, there's obviously a big jump here from that early paper copy to, printing out a nice version that looks like this physical version I'm holding up now, the nice box here. So we chose a manufacturer called What's Games because that was the only company we found in China at the time that had what's called ICTI certification, or International Council of Toy Industry Manufacturers. It's a certification for ethical treatment of their workers. Now it's called the Ethical Toy Program, a much more manageable name. So if people want to look it up, they can Google, anyone out there, you can Google Ethical Toy Program. And that was really important to me coming out of fair trade, that we chose a manufacturer who, ideally was treating workers well and certified by a third party that they were doing so. I chose that one along with John and I think probably our graphic designer at the time who still works with us years later. And I don't believe for Wing It initially that we used Game Crafter, but we actually did, and I still have this copy too, we actually did print out a physical colored version of the box at Staples initially just to kind of, see what it looked like and gauge the size, right? It was initially a smaller box. And that copy it's taped together. If people look on our Kickstarter for Wing It, they can still see what that box looked like because it's the one we actually used in the Kickstarter filming. So you get to see an early stage version. It doesn't look that scrappy. It's a little hard to tell from film, but it definitely isn't the, hardy, firm, really nice box that we had today. And honestly, in terms of the physical product piece, in my mind, what you asked is almost like a very simple answer, or simple question and simple answer, which is that, we submitted files to the manufacturer after we completed the Kickstarter in 2017. That was when we incorporated and then ran the Kickstarter shortly thereafter. And they turn the files into something really nice, and they send you a plain white box. I believe I might still have that version too. Just a plain white box and plain white cards. It's very, very simple, and you feel like, oh, it's a physical thing, but it's not even printed on yet, right? It's still very simple, and it doesn't look like much other than a box, but it feels great. It feels hearty and exciting. Anyway, and then eventually they do send you a sample, of course. Although some early stage samples you get are actually, I'm sort of drawing a rectangle for people who can't see me, a big rectangle in the air of just the cards. And it's a big, glossy, I don't think it's laminated, but really, really shiny, nice paper that is gigantic with all the cards laid out. And you've got to individually go card by card if there are, lots of written text on the cards like with us. You have to individually go and see if there were any mistakes made. We'd already, edited it, of course, but you want to double check. And then you approve files after making any corrections. And then eventually they, I think they do send you a full sample, but then after that, they just send you however many thousands you order, right? So it's kind of like a big jump from getting the white sample to possibly getting, I believe, the full sample. But sometimes I don't even think I've gotten that, to then just getting the full deal, And I do want to just say, it's really important that I will point out, it is very common to get a copy through Game Crafter. Probably many of your listeners know about Game Crafter or have even used it. And if you haven't used it, I highly recommend them for samples. I still have my early stage copy of the $1 Million Doodle, which is our third game that came out last year. And honestly, it's nothing like the final in terms of the box, but it's still a very nice, hearty version. And I was able to use that at GAMA last year to show people, retailers in particular, what the box would look like. So that's another step in between that sometimes occurred, but I don't even think we knew about Game Crafter for the first Wing It. So that's how you do it.
And those are the nuts and bolts.
Submit the files.
So those are the nuts and bolts.
Those are some nuts and bolts, yep.
So the angle for this particular segment, I suppose, is what does it take to succeed as a board game publisher? So that is the physical manifestation of creating a game, creating a product that you can actually then sell. For you, how did you go about doing that? So you went from the concept to the idea, you had the design, you had all the files, you had the graphic designer create everything. Did you just then say, okay, I want 10,000 copies and I'll figure it out? Or did you how did you get it into the hands of the retailers and that sort of thing?
Okay. Well, that followed some months after the Kickstarter. but we were getting into early retailers by just walking in the door. And that will come up again later. So I want to break your question into two. First, we had to actually run the Kickstarter to see how many copies to make. That sort of self-guides what to do. And for me, I always knew I wanted to turn this game into a company. I knew that I wanted to start a company. We weren't just starting Flying Leap Games to produce one game. So my advice for anyone out there who's thinking about launching a publishing company, if you're pretty early stage, is to and even for later stage publishers, is to think about what are the avenues, what are the ways you want to sell, B2C, business to consumer or direct to consumer, business to business, like direct to retailer, or through distributors, which is another form of B2B, business to business. We want to sell all of them, but we do very little investment. In fact, we're going to ramp this up soon, but we do very little investment in B2C at all. We mostly sell to stores, in other words. We don't sell a lot direct to consumer. And the reason I mention that in the context of the Kickstarter is that if you're mostly trying to sell, games to the Kickstarter and then you won't, necessarily have time to invest in getting into retail, that's okay. That's actually really common. But I spend a lot of time, and I enjoy it. I don't mean to brag about it. I spend a lot of time coaching people on how to get into retail, especially after the Kickstarter, because I know people have extra games left and they want to get into retail, but they just don't have someone guiding them on how. Which is also why I gave the big session at GAMA, the Game Manufacturers Association Expo last year, on how to get into retail. So when we went into our Kickstarter, we didn't know we would only sell a few hundred copies. Now, it's not tiny, but it wasn't like there was a lot of buzz, as my friend Dave Salisbury, who's a retailer in the UK, would say. It wasn't like there was a lot of buzz about Wing It. We had a very modest Kickstarter. It was a little under $12,000. It was $11,000 and something for a $10,000 goal. But again, I knew I was starting a business and wanted to really emphasize the retail side. So in terms of that retail side, once we ran the Kickstarter, which, again, was very small, and that was largely because I didn't know to build up an email list for months beforehand. We were doing it mostly with people we knew, and then, we obviously had other people who just found it. But again, most of the people we knew, I would say. I've never counted exactly how many, but we weren't spending, 9 months going to cons, so we just didn't know to do that. Where people go to conventions for 9 months, actually build an email list, as you probably know, but just more for the listener's sake. So again, really small Kickstarter. So we had around maybe 1,500 or 1,600 copies to sell still. Well, we were walking into stores in cities that we were living in or were from. So St. Louis was where we're both from. And then I was living in New York City at the time by then. John was living in Boston, where I had been living. So we walked into stores in those three cities and just tried to hand sell it. And so that way, and through a trip to DC, we got into 10 stores. I think we had an 11th on the way. But then what happened is I showed up at the Game Manufacturers Association March of 2018. And people who have heard me on a podcast or any kind of interview before have probably heard this story, because it's a story I often tell. It's fun to tell, and it's exciting. So do you mind if I jump into the retail side, how we first got into retail? I always feel like I don't want people to get tired of me talking, but this is a particularly fun part of the interview always. So I actually went to GAMA almost as an accident, in the sense that I had to decide whether to go to GAMA or Origins. I was going to get, I think, a free booth badge with our consolidator, which is Hit Point Sales. It's really important to line up a consolidator early on. So the main ones being Hit Point Sales, Impressions, or PSI, and those companies get you into distribution more easily when you have just a game or a couple games. So I was working with Hit Point Sales. I think they actually suggested going to Origins, but Origins is in June, and I had my third cousin in Brooklyn's, it was actually my third cousin, once removed's bat mitzvah coming up in Brooklyn, which is funny just because we didn't really know each other that well, but I thought, I'm living in Brooklyn, when's the next time I'll have a family event in Brooklyn? I didn't have, much family there. So I decided that I would go to GAMA instead, which is in March. Now, the GAMA Expo, I cannot emphasize enough. This is if people get nothing else out of this interview, if you run a publishing company and you're not yet a retailer or want to expand your retail sales, just go to GAMA and spend a lot of time at the bar, and also, of course, have a booth at the exhibit hall. Here's what happened with us that led us to grow really quickly. We actually went from about 10 stores to almost 60. Because of GAMA, and that happened really quickly. Sort of revving it up here, not to build up too much, but revving it up, because this is an exciting part. So When I showed up at Gamma, I knew almost no one. And I also missed the first night's big networking event. In fact, it felt like a main networking event. It was on a Monday night because my plane was delayed coming from New York City to Reno. Yeah, of course, right? But in a way, that was a good thing because even though I got in super late and showed up I was staying in a hostel because it was very affordable, got there pretty late. The next night, I decided, well, I'm going to go where the retailers are. The retailers had an event, and I thought I'll just show up at Edge Nightclub, which is kind of like a bar at the location where Gamma is usually located. It's the Peppermill Resort and Casino in Reno. So there's this Edge nightclub. They had a big retail event put on by a TCG company, a trading card company. And I actually got there after the presentation, but was still offered a drink. And they were like, oh, so how'd you like the presentation? And I said, well, I wasn't really here. And they're like, oh, you can still have a free drink. When I had walked in with my St. Louis retailers, who were some of the only people I knew. They saw me outside with a grocery sack, actually. This part's a little funny. It should be embarrassing, but it's fine. I had walked back from the grocery store, partly to save money on the Lyft and just, or the Uber and see a little of Reno. I walked back from the grocery store. I had a bag of groceries with me. I walk into a nightclub, you can imagine, with a bag of groceries. And then I get my free drink, and I walk into a little inlet at the bar. And the inlet has a group of people, it turns out, are all retailers and all friends or friendly. I just start talking with them. And I would do what I call a really soft sell. I would just say, oh, when we made our game, da-da-da-da-da. Like I would mention that we had a game at least. After a little while, Matt, that is the owner of Batcave Games out in Vancouver, asked me, well, tell you what, why don't I take a look at your game while you eat your cheese? Because he knew that I had cheese I wanted to eat since I just hadn't had enough for dinner. So I started eating my cheese at this bar. They still remind me of this. Some of them thought about it a year later even. So I started eating my cheese, and Matt looks at Wing It. He takes the box, he turns it over, and he looks at the back. And he says to me after, skimming or reading the back briefly, he goes, are you on PayPal? Because he goes, are you on PayPal? Because I'd PayPal you for 10 of these right now. And I said, really? I mean, that 10 was a good sale. I think we had just sold to the Strand in New York City 10 or 12. That was a good size sale. And he said, yeah, I could sell 5 of these tomorrow. I could sell 5 of these right now. Watch me. I was like, share it as like a little brag, right? Yeah, no, it's a great story, Tom. And so he proceeds to get everybody's attention. I always feel like I don't want to like take over the conversation at a bar, but he kind of took over the conversation, on behalf of me and this game, Wing It. And he gets their attention. He teaches people to play. Like he explains it, and they start playing. And I'm feeling like Annie in the musical Annie, like pinch me, please. Like this is really happening. Well, they played, and they got another retailer, Andrew Zorowitz, out of bed. He runs Phone Brain Games. He's kind of like this retailer guru. And he came, and he felt like this was going to be a hit. They helped me raise my price that night. They said it's not really a $25 game. You should raise it to $30. So I did. The first printing, I think we still did $25, but I raised it to $30 after that. And they talked and gave me advice so late that we had to leave the nightclub when it closed at midnight, go out to these white couches in this big open area where people gather by the main bar at the Peppermill Resort and Casino. We talked for about 4 hours, so till about 2:15 in the morning. And we just talked, and they gave me advice, and we got to know each other. I felt we started becoming friends that night. And I remember going back to my hostel and sending my family over our WhatsApp for the family. I sent a description of what had happened. Well, the next day we began getting orders, some of them from other places in the country, like someone who said, I live in, I think, Florida. I couldn't make Gamma because I'm having a baby soon, but I'd love to get, 24 copies, let's say. And, 24 being, of course, a very big order, and especially for a small company, but just in general, it's a big order for one store. And Matt let me know that he had shared the story of what had happened with on a retail group, on this sort of like private retailers Facebook group. And he told me that at the show, at the exhibit hall that day. And we started getting a lot of interest in getting orders. And in fact, one retailer, Eric Bigglestone, had been from Games of Berkeley, which I had cold called at some point, but not heard back from. And they became a customer, and Eric and I are friends now. A lot of these people are friends on Facebook now. Well, we sold out 4 weeks later, almost exactly 4 weeks later. We actually took an order for 48 games that we couldn't even fulfill. And she ended up getting a small amount, like I think 8 games. We had to lower her order later because she was like not able to sell as fast as she wanted. But like, getting an order for 48 games right when you run out is both exciting and also kind of like, oh no, it's a oh shoot moment. We had those, right? So that's how we grew really quickly. And that night also, that night at the bar and also just that event also helped us get into Canada. I think it also played a role in getting us into the UK later, which Dave Salisbury, who's a friend from the UK, really helped with. He has a store in Manchester, and he helped us get into distribution in the UK. So out of that came other countries as well. That was a lot of storytelling, but that's the early stage. And so if I can just kind of take a step back from that story and say what are the takeaways? If you're a newer small publisher and you couldn't already tell this, it's really important to go to the bar at night. It's really important to just be around retailers and talk to a lot of people. Ideally, as many people as possible. I can't tell you how many connections I made, late at night, or how much I've learned. Just how many friendships even that I've deepened as well. I mean, there are friendships in there too, which is really nice because you're working with your friends, right?
Which is fantastic. I think that makes a lot of sense because this business, when you are a retailer, I advocate to make it more relationship based than transaction based, and I think that's pretty common for most of the successful retailers as well. Is that they know that it's not just a one off shot. You're not just selling a game to a random person off the street. Most of the time, these people become friends or at least friendly with people that are involved, and they take ownership over the business, and they start to feel like it's part of like there are a huge number of people who go to game stores and believe that it's their game store, right? It's like that's their spot, that's their Cheers, right? They go to where everyone knows their name. And I think the idea of if you want to succeed in this business, it works on both ends too. Like it's funny how many people that you've mentioned I've spoken to at some point in the past, either had them on the podcast or they were speakers at the summit that I hosted in November. So many people are more than happy to share their knowledge and their expertise and connections and help you if they can help you. This is probably one of the nicest things about this industry is that the people who were really, I want to say at the top of their game, the ones who are putting in the work and they treat it like a real business and it's a real worthwhile endeavor. They're not the kind of person who would, undercut you or try and, I don't want to say bad things, but they're good people. They're just good people. And if they can help you, they will. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons is that if you want to succeed, you need to create those connections. You need to find those people and find a way to get in front of them and help them and add value to that relationship and create a real, not just a business relationship, but like a real friendship. And that's a great foundation for success pretty much no matter what you're doing.
I was going to say just definitely, and I would say one funny addition to what you're saying is that sometimes you feel like you become good enough friends that it actually becomes harder to do the sales part. It almost feel funny bringing up a sale, with someone, but it's still important to do that and to get past that feeling because, you do need to make a sale and make money at the end of the day. So I, try to push past that, but it is hard. Like I get to know people pretty well over Facebook or from visiting their store, visiting their city. And then you feel a little awkward selling to people sometimes, even though that is an important part of running a company, right?
Yeah. Sales is a tricky thing. Pretty much everyone has some sort of preconceived notions around what it means to sell. And I can totally understand how you'd feel like that might be something a little bit sticky to be like, we're good friends, but I need you to buy this from me right now. Can you cut me a check? Yeah.
Well, so I'll add a caveat to what I just said, which is that, when I go into stores, even before knowing people, so much of building the relationship is just talking about, many topics besides the games that I'm working on. Obviously, I go in and I meet at their counter or their table and I show them what we have. But, that meeting might also be about how things are going in their store, or sometimes I'll get a tour around the store, or just chatting about Gamma perhaps, and they'll bring up all different topics. Usually, they're industry or store related. But my point is to say that another piece of advice I've shared in interviews like this and just in conversations with people one-on-one is it's really important to, make sure part of your interaction in a store is not just about your games or what you have to offer. It's also just learning from them and ideally if one can remember and not be too nervous about it, to let people guide the conversation a bit too.
Having a regular conversation where you can just kind of, talk about the weather, but like talk about common threads, right? Common things between the two of you that don't necessarily involve a transaction. That's a totally viable way to create a real life connection, and it can very much lead into a sale, or it might not, and it might lead to one later. It's all good, right?
Right. And I want to emphasize, because I was thinking about it in relation to a story about a South African retailer I want to share, that sometimes also the relationship building as far as a friendship does also come after you've made a sale too, like after you've worked together a bit. You might end up having times at Gamma where you just spend an hour talking about unrelated topics to your games or the industry even, or vaguely related topics. And so, I guess what I'm saying here is look at how friendships develop, and it's helpful to view relationships with your retailers or other colleagues that way too. And it's an industry where I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I was just sharing that with my parents earlier today. I think this is an industry where it's okay to be open about, not about everything necessarily, but just about things going on in your life beside games sometimes too. So I do want to mention, in the context of getting into other countries through connections I've made at Gamma, through meeting retailers at the bar, I often feel like we internalize stories. I feel like I've learned this, that we can learn things best through story rather than, just data or the fact being stated. And so I want to mention one other very brief story that is related to getting into South Africa. So I'm going to take us back for a moment, Tom, and any other, listeners who are joining us later. I want to briefly take us back to Gamma of 2019. So again, this is March. Always it's in March for the expo. I was at the, the main circular bar with the white couches, and somehow I met this South African retailer. I think he might have been at the actual exhibit hall earlier. I'm not sure. But we met up on the couches perhaps, and I showed him our game Wing It. It was Wing It specifically. And we didn't get into South Africa right away, even though we had a connection to a distributor there called Solar Pop, not a direct one, but through our consolidator, Hit Point Sales. We didn't approach Hit Point Sales at that point about getting in. I'm not actually sure why. But that was March that we talked for a little while. I got to know Bradley, who is a manager at the store in South Africa that he was literally flying to Reno from. It's pretty wild. So flash forward to Gen Con in August, and Solar Pop, the distributor, had at least a couple people there who showed up at my booth. Bradley, the retailer from South Africa, made sure that they stopped by my booth at Gen Con, which I was actually sharing with another retailer or another publisher. So I don't even think that booth was under my name. So they stopped by our booth at Gen Con and, looked at our games. And I think that's where they decided to carry them. Now, it turns out I found out this Gamma a couple of years later, they're not necessarily bringing enough for the store where Bradley is a manager. So we need to get another way to go to South Africa as well, which we have. We have now figured out a way to do that. But the point kind of being like a night at Gamma at the bar in March led 5 months later to more, I would say, of an example of closing the deal with a distributor that August, and that of course led to some emails back and forth with our consolidator. But you can see how much it matters to just have that personal connections of showing off your game late at night, because that's exactly what we did. And that's how we got into another English speaking country, which is important since our games use so much of the English language. So again, same takeaway, just get to know people as people, and then, relationships will grow. Bradley and the owner of that store actually came to Gamma virtually, over really cool, it's sort of spatial chat, the software that I met you recently, Tom. They came to that, and I spent a lot of time with those two, just chatting. In fact, the first time I met her, I think her name is Andrea, she was saying she was starstruck, which was really cute. And I got to know her a bit. I got to know Bradley better. And again, we just kind of spent a lot of time in groups chilling and talking. And so to me, that's another example of just how you get to know people, beyond their role as a retailer. You get to, again, just spend time together. So just so everybody knows, Gamma will now be doing spatial chat meetups of some kind quarterly. So if you are a publisher and you're listening, please be sure to stop by the bar, later this year and get to know people. It's obviously much more affordable than showing up in Reno. No hotel, no flight, right? No extra food cost. So please do come to that later this year, and keep an eye on gamma.org for how to get involved. By the way, I don't work for Gamma. I do volunteer with a couple teams there, the diversity committee and the education committee. So I don't want people to think I'm spouting off this as a way of broadcasting my employer or anything. It's just that I'm a big fan of Gamma and the way that it, allows people to connect so easily.
Yep, 100%. And it's a bit of a cliche, but like the saying goes, your network is your net worth. And the idea that the connections that you create, like it's an exponential growth, right? Like, one person, then those people know 6 people, and those people know 6 people. And, you're, the 7 degrees away from knowing every single person on the planet, give or take. So the more people that you connect with, the more people that they know who can connect you with the right people that you need to get in front of, and then can show you, can help you out, and you can help them out, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And shout out to Brad, because he was talking with you at the time that I was talking with you, and he was one of the. I remember him from showing up at the summit because I think he's the only one I've ever seen out of South Africa who's running a store and putting in the work and that kind of thing. So he's doing a good job, and he's obviously participating well.
So Brad, if you're listening, I'll try to get him to listen. Actually, Brad, if you're listening, you're how I got into South Africa so easily. So thank you.
So on that topic, was South Africa one of the stores that you managed to visit, or is that like some future?
Oh no, definitely not. It's definitely too far and would be too expensive to go to. But I was able to make it to the UK Games Expo. That was the furthest. That was the farthest location I have gone to, was the UK, because of UK Games Expo. I surrounded that trip with store visits before and after the expo there.
Yeah, like many retailers, they do the same thing. When they go on vacation, it's a tour of the local game stores, and I am guilty of that myself. So I have not gone and seen as many as you have. 275 is a lot of stores. So I think this is a good segue to go into the other overall topic, the other overall segment of, over the course of visiting so many retailers and so many different game store operations and so many different continents, right? You've seen obviously a lot of different ways of getting things done. So I wanted to kind of explore some of the common threads amongst the most successful, or successful is kind of a nebulous term, but some of the best game stores that you visited. What did they share that you think retailers should know or would benefit from knowing?
Sure, I would love to dive into that, and it is a big topic. So I came up with a few, main common threads that I want to focus on. Of course, I won't cover it all, and I also want to just put front and center that since I'm not a retailer, this is very much coming just from my observations as a publisher and as a customer of many a game store. I often will, purchase games at my stores. So I will always I will usually try to give myself a little tour around the game store, even if they don't give me a tour themselves. And I'm only offering for people who are running game stores, especially if I work with you, that caveat, just so I say, front and center, I'm not an expert, and that I'm not trying to be an expert, but that I do know a fair amount of what makes a successful game store, just because I've done a lot of visits and demos at stores. Okay, so let's start out with one of my favorite ones. I really believe that gaming builds community, right? We all, I think in the industry, acknowledge that and are really aware of that. In fact, that's part of our company's DNA. We love that aspect of creating games. And even though it wasn't why I went into this industry, I will just put out there front and center that it's become a, big factor of what drives me and big thing that I care about. And game stores clearly share that as well. So building community is something that the most successful game stores just appear, at a surface level to do very well, as I've said. Specifically, what does that look like? Well, it looks like having regular game nights, having game nights for specific audiences. So, for example, there'll be on many, board game store calendars, a board game night, which is funny to me, right? When I entered the industry, I would have thought that maybe every night would be a board game night. And there are stores you can stop in every night, but there are also many a store with a designated board game night, because they also have a Warhammer 40K night. They also have many Magic nights, right? And so I think building community around specific sub-communities within the broader gaming culture and community of gamers is really important. And I think that helps create a regular place gamers go to for their entertainment, right? As one game store owner has wisely pointed out, his competition, it was a man in this case, his competition includes movie theaters, right? It includes Netflix, anything people can stay at home and do for entertainment for a couple hours. But a game store offers something that a movie night, and even to some extent a bar, and to a huge extent, staying home watching Netflix, cannot offer. which is a sense of regular community around a strong shared interest. And I want to have enough humility to point out that I'm saying something a lot of people will know. So this is mostly either for newer publishers or for people thinking about founding a game store, that it is so important to have regular game nights and have them ideally be, I mean, from what I've seen, ideally themed around a certain kind of gaming, game or gaming subculture. So the reason I can say that from again, I'll tell a story from personal experience, is that I've had some pretty successful to, in one case, a very successful game night because of the fact that there's a regular group. And in one case, because they even had an outside person, outside from the staff, like a customer or customers organizing the game night. So for example, when I was in Rochester, New York at Millennium Games, that's Travis Millennium or Travis Severance's store, that was one of my biggest game nights ever by a lot. We probably had, 20 or 30 people during the night. It felt more like 30. It could have been like 25 people at 3 different tables, actually, over the course of the night, playing Wing It and Wing It Beyond, and one big round of the $1 Million Doodle, which is our third game that came out last year. Even though it wasn't produced, manufactured yet, last January, oh, that's so weird, a little over a year ago, when I traveled up from New York City to Vermont and then on through Canada, I did a trip around basically the Montreal stores, then over the Toronto stores, and then back down into the US and hit northern New York. And when I went to Rochester, I definitely hit Travis's store. It's one of the most, as far as I know, most successful stores nationally. He had both a staff person and a customer organize a pretty good size game night. It seems like a regular thing on Thursdays that I think that where they actually feature publishers too. And so I got to go be part of that. And that was really successful, I think, not just because he has regular groups coming and they have a regular, gaming group, but also because, he has customers themselves bringing other customers in. So that's just one model that I've seen. And again, nothing I say, well, I don't think I made this clear earlier, so I'm going to make it clear, very clear now. Nothing I say has to be done, right, to make a successful game store. There's no one way to be a successful game store. But all of these factors are really helpful in building your success. Because if people are regularly coming into your store, they're also ideally, they're buying things too. Maybe they're buying just a snack if you have food to offer. But they're also going to know that, to keep the doors open, they need to buy games as well. And, if they're having a magic night, they're probably buying, their new magic cards from your store as well, of course. Okay, so I want to actually move on from that part of it, but just to pause for a moment. Do you have anything to build on that or any other questions related to that part of building community through the game nights?
I agree.
That
Simply put, I think that's 100% the truth. I think that the idea of the community is one of the fundamental things that differentiates a game store from another retail location. Because like Toys R Us sells games, but no one's going to Toys R Us to find new games, find new people to play with. That's not the reason. They come in and they leave. And there's a reason why, I feel like there's a reason why Toys R Us is basically going extinct. And it's because that model is not, like, for the game section, that's not how it works. I don't think you can have games. And like I've advocated for, with Magic, the idea of being that the game wouldn't exist if it weren't for game stores. Like if the way the Wizards is doing things, as big as Magic is, it would almost not exist if it weren't so heavily supported by a infrastructure of game stores all over the world, providing that community to make it what it is. If they all disappeared overnight, Magic would basically go the same way. It would be gone, or it would be very vastly diminished. Things might be changing now. It's kind of like shifting towards digital, but generally speaking, the physical side, the interaction of with people. That's the reason why the games work. And I think that's pretty much the same for most like collectible card games or trading games, Dungeons and Dragons, all of this stuff that kind of, fits in the sandbox. All of that applies to the idea of if there is no community, there's no sales. I feel like you have to have some sort of a gathering. And I know it's really hard right now because of COVID and all that.
Sure.
But creating that is a really important point, and how you go about doing that. And again, like you mentioned, it's not This is not something that every single game store has to do in order to be successful, and it doesn't guarantee success. And like, there's a lot of ways of going about doing it, but this is certainly one good principle, one good angle going towards it. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that.
And are you saying, Tom, that Magic wouldn't exist in its current form, or just any kind of,
Well, my personal experience is more deeply with Magic. I know that the friendships that I formed because of Magic, because I was able to connect with them, none of those would have occurred if I had not had a place to go to find those people. So my belief is that the game and the sales and the revenue and Wizards of the Coast and all of the employees that are involved in the creation of the game, I don't think they would be able to do what they're doing right now if it weren't for this layer of retailers, this layer of game store owners who are creating this community space in order to facilitate the game. And I feel like they're symbiotic, that the community and Magic are co-joined and they need to be there. And if it doesn't exist, then like the game itself is pretty much done as well. I think it would have gone the way that several other card games have kind of declined over the years.
Sure. And I don't know if you did this intentionally or subconsciously. I think it was subconscious, but I smiled because you had, I thought, been talking about Magic the Gathering, and then you mentioned, if people weren't gathering like this, it wouldn't exist. It's true that if people aren't gathering, it's hard to have Magic the Gathering, right?
That is true. The Gathering is pretty much a crucial point of it, and it's built right into the name. It's not much without the Gathering.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was a Freudian slip, I suppose.
No, it was perfect. It was a cute connection there, so I wanted to point it out. Well, and this point about building community around different types of gamers, people who are into board games and people into trading card games, and specifically Magic, Dungeons and Dragons, of course, there are a lot of game stores with Dungeons and Dragons nights, relates to another point I wanted to bring up that I hadn't actually thought as much about earlier for this particular show, which is that welcoming all types of gamers is another way of saying that we also want to welcome all types of people. So whether that's people who have other types of abilities, maybe people who are in a wheelchair, you want to make sure your game space is accessible, or that at least one of your game spaces is accessible, right? Or welcoming people with different, I forget what the word is, but different abilities as far as, I think it's called neurodivergent, just with different, neurological tendencies. I don't know if I'm using the right term, so apologies if I'm showing my own ignorance here. But I did some revisions on a presentation that my friend Dave Salisbury did. He's the retailer I mentioned from the UK, and he had done a presentation. Huh?
Fanboy 3.
Fanboy 3, yep. He owns Fanboy 3 Manchester, UK, for anyone listening. That's his good store. So Dave has created a really welcoming space, and his staff has created a welcoming space along with him, because he's worked at coding his store for all different types of people. Now, I had never heard the term of coding a store before, coding a convention to be more welcoming, but this is a really awesome idea, so I want to be sure to flag it. I had been revising his presentation, as I mentioned, that he gave at Gamma, about just over 2 weeks ago, and he used the word neurodivergent. I realized, he's saying, he wants to make sure people with autism feel welcome in the store. People with different social, abilities feel welcome in the store. And also people of different ethnic backgrounds, people of different economic backgrounds feel welcome in the store. So he made sure, for example, to cater to the needs of his players who wanted to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is it Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Yu-Gi-Oh?
I believe it is Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yu-Gi-Oh! That's right. Yeah. So he had found that he had a group of young people who really wanted to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, some retailers, and I'm sure others in the industry, kind of give Yu-Gi-Oh! They give it a bad name, or feel like it gives itself a bad name, or sort of knock it. And I don't know enough about the depths of that, but I will just say that he had a group of people who, were not all necessarily native-born people in Britain. They were coming from different immigrant communities, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And the main point there is that they felt like, one of the things that they connected over, the main game they connected over, was Yu-Gi-Oh! So he needed to make sure to provide some space for that group. And another way that people talk about making their store more welcoming is to make sure people of different genders feel welcome. Dave wanted to make sure that his store felt welcome to people who were LGBTQ, so that's both around gender and sexuality. He realized that he needed to make it more explicitly welcoming, so he took steps to do so. But also, you'll hear, women who are game store owners, which are definitely a big minority of game store owners. You'll hear them talk about in presentations at Gamma, for instance, which I've attended, talking about how to make sure your space has women in it or have women staff and have women playing so that women feel welcome. And I want to make the same suggestion, piggybacking off of their point, that it's important to have, if you can, find people who are non-binary staff to, hire non-binary staff, hire people who identify as trans or non-gender conforming. And to also, even if you can't do that, especially maybe in a smaller town where there aren't as many people applying for jobs, period, to make sure that your space is welcoming for people of all genders in your gaming area. I obviously am erring on the side of, the more liberal end of the spectrum in the gaming community, but I think everyone can agree that this is not only a way to be welcoming and show warmth towards people of all different backgrounds, whether it's nationality or gender or sexuality or any other trait, but to also just point out that this is a good business model. You're literally expanding the market, right, by making your store more welcoming. You might end up accidentally excluding a few people who don't feel comfortable around people of different genders, but I'm guessing that they'll still probably come to your store to play if they want to play there. And I'll just put out there that, it's a very good business decision to welcome everybody you can, and you have to take specific steps to make your space welcoming, either making signage explicit or making sure that, people feel like their needs are met in a store when they're not treated well. I know that, and it wasn't over a specific incident, but I know that Dave has talked about, again, this is Dave Salisbury, I'm going to be bringing him up a lot. Dave Salisbury talked in his presentation about how to code your store about how many young people he had sat down with, young adults he'd sat down with, and just helped with issues in their lives, help talk through problems. Now, not everybody is going to be Dave Salisbury working on mental health issues in his store. He has a designated program for that called Roll With It. You can look up Roll With It and Dave Salisbury if you want to learn about that. But, you can make sure that when something happens or when you see someone looking uncomfortable, that you talk to them directly and talk to them maybe quietly to the side and say, how do we build this store in a way that will make it more welcoming for you? How can we make sure that the community is welcoming for you? So just being explicit about being welcoming is important. You can say you're welcoming or say you welcome people of all backgrounds, but actually taking the extra step and doing some of what we call in this kind of work, emotional labor of figuring out how to be welcoming is important. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now. I feel like I'm emphasizing that point a lot, but I just want to make sure, gamers of all backgrounds feeling welcome in a store is a common thread I've seen among, certain successful stores at least.
No, I agree with that. And while you were talking about it, there was two things that were going through my mind. And the first is that, yes, obviously if you can expand your customer base, that's great, right? Like the more people that you can bring into the fold and sell to, the more successful your business will be. That's not, obviously you don't want to say, I don't want to sell to this vast section of the population. I just want to sell this little tiny one. Like, why would you voluntarily hamstring yourself to do that? Mm-hmm. So, obviously open the doors because this isn't a private club. But then the other thing was that I can't remember where I originally read it, but I believe it was in an article at some point. But it was a story of somebody, again, like most of my experiences go back to Magic. It was a story of somebody who went to, I believe it was Japan, and they were on a bus. And it was like a long bus ride, and they had their Magic deck with them because they were, Magic players. And they were playing with it, or they were shuffling it up, or they were looking at it and then moving some cards around or something like that. And somebody across the aisle was like, someone who didn't speak English saw the deck and like kind of said, connected with them and said, okay, yeah. And they brought out their Magic cards. And they were able to play a game on that bus, despite the fact that neither of them actually spoke the same language.
Wow, that's
so
they
were
cool.
able to connect as Magic players. Like, I know exactly what you're doing. We played the same cards. If they're both standard or both legacy or whatever, you can identify what they are just by looking at the art. You can usually figure out what the other person is trying to do by just, I'm going to point to this, I'm going to point to that, and then the game works itself out and you can actually create a relationship with somebody without having to be able to even know their name, not properly anyways, at least in the case of Japanese English. That can be a challenge. But that's what games do. the game is like not just Magic, board games and games of all types allow you to create a connection with somebody on a completely level playing field most of the time. And it's a way to create those horizontal bonds and that just probably don't exist anywhere else, right? Like where, like other than the bar, and the bar is kind of like not a great example, but it's probably the closest analogy. Where could you have like a CEO of a multinational corporation sit down against a like 12-year-old and play a game where the 12-year-old can beat them, if they're playing at an F&M or something like that. And, could be from different parts of the planet, could have completely different educational backgrounds, totally different family life, but they could become, maybe friends, maybe acquaintances. Like those connections just don't exist anywhere else. And I think that's, if you can make it so that your store can facilitate that's obviously a great thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Now, on that bus, was it, I'd miss this if you said it, was it an American and a Japanese person?
I believe so. So.
That's really neat. Actually, just as a side note, because it's an interesting, connection here, last year, I actually met a retailer from Japan. I don't think he was Japanese, but he runs a store on an island off the coast of Japan. There happens to be a U.S. military base there. So it's a pretty good audience at the military base. And I thought that was really cool that someone flew from Japan, to come to Gamma. I mean, I'm sure he, mixed up the trip with something else, but that was still really neat. Well, an example of what you just said, I actually, while you were just sharing that story, I pulled up a quote here that I wanted to share, is when our graphic designer, rather one of our graphic designers' cousins played Wing It with people from other backgrounds. So again, Wing It is our first game, the game of extreme storytelling. Wing It Beyond, the standalone sci-fi expansion being the second one. And the quote is from our graphic designer describing, this was just a text to John, my co-founder, and I. She was describing what she heard from her cousin after he played Wing It at his community college, okay? So this is what she wrote us. Oh, an important background is that she is a Korean Uzbekistani American immigrant. I believe she was actually a refugee too. So she's Korean, but she's Korean American, but she had come through Uzbekistan at some point. So I have a complicated way of describing her background. All right. So, and Yulia Kim is her name. All right. Here's what she wrote us. Also, guys, this is so touching, but my cousin who came to the States a couple years ago took Wing It to his conversation club, which is a group for international students at his community college. And they played the game for hours. He said that it was so much fun that even when they were kicked out of the room, they went somewhere else to play the game somewhere else. And he said that it was his first time getting really close to people and making friends. So there you go, a great quote that I love using, I love talking about, because it's a perfect example, right, of people from all different nationalities inside a conversation club, building friendships more deeply, at least, through a game night. And there are few things more gratifying than hearing about one of your games, being a vehicle for that kind of relationship building and deepening. So just to piggyback
exactly. On case closed. Bam.
Case closed. Drop the mic. Right? Yeah. I don't have a mic, but I'll metaphorically drop one. Yeah. Anyway, I don't like it to sound like a bragging point, but just it's a really touching story to share. So I do like to I like to share it. I wanted to bring it in.
And it goes to the point. If you could make your store more welcoming to a wider range of people, you're more likely to create those kinds of situations, those kinds of experiences.
Definitely. And actually, Tom, I want to build on the second point that I gave earlier about how to code your store. This isn't always easy. I heard from a retailer in Reno who I spent a lot of time with, particularly at this Gamma, late at night. We were still in some of the rooms at the virtual trade show, that his community, for example, in Reno, doesn't have a lot of people of diverse backgrounds coming to his store. So it sounds like there is a pretty big Latino community, but for example, when people line up outside the store for a certain product and there's this huge line of 50 people, maybe one or two of them will be, Black or Latino, but almost everybody lining up outside the store is white. So I don't remember if I mentioned this to him or not, but one piece of advice I have for people, and, this won't be something totally new to certain publishers or retailers, but this is what I think of as good advice for myself to take and for any publishers and retailers to, to try to figure out how to apply, is to actually go out into the community and, create gamers out of people in diverse parts of your community. So what I mean by that is to do something similar to what Pat Fuge does. Pat Fuge will be delighted, I'm sure, that I'm bringing him up on this show. Pat actually goes out to schools a lot in his community and leads game nights. And the one time I did this, it happened to be at a store in Queens that was mostly Black and Latino students. It wasn't necessarily intentional that I went to, a diverse school of mostly minority students, but I happen to have a friend who founded and runs this school in Queens. So I went out there, I talked about being a board game entrepreneur, starting my company, and then we played both Wing It and Snake Oil at the time. So they got introduced to some games. And, I don't know if we made any sales from it. We may not have made sales, actually. But that wasn't necessarily the point. The point was just to introduce entrepreneurship and games to this crowd of students. And I mentioned Pat going to the community and myself in this one store as a way to do this strategy more broadly, to take this to heart and say, let's go into stores in the inner city that will be largely Black. Let's go out to stores that are, high percentage Asian American or, Hispanic American, Latinx American, depending on your preferred term. And let's hold game club afternoons. Let's do game nights. So I guess that's a way that people can diversify their customer base in the long term by letting those folks know, hey, by the way, we have a weekly game night at the store. You're welcome to come. Another suggestion I made to this retailer in Gamma was to look up Black churches in Reno. I actually looked up, just Black churches in his area and, found various listings just on, Google Maps, and to actually call local congregations in your area. You could go to a Hebrew Israelite congregation, which is, mostly Black Jewish community, and offer to do game nights. So just diversifying your store can be a matter of doing the hard work, but really rewarding and I'm sure very fun work of community outreach as well. And that's a way just to let people know your store even exists. I was into games for years before becoming a game designer, but I didn't know board game stores were a thing. I had no idea. So it helps to go out and tell people these stores exist, right? So that's another specific suggestion I had, just to diversify who's coming into your store.
Yeah, definitely. The when you're in the sandbox, it's really easy to think that, well, everybody knows about all these board games. Everybody knows how this works, and it's hard to, get out of your fishbowl for a little bit. But yes, it's. I definitely agree. That is one of the things that I have seen in interviewing a lot of game store owners, is that some of the most successful in the sense that they've created a really profitable business, but also a really connected community and a lot of people who they care about and who care about them, like that kind of a relationship. They do that through actual outreach. Like you said, they'll go to the schools in the area and they'll either set up some sort of a program or club or something along those lines, and kind of taking the community from, their four walls and expanding it outwards and pushing it. Not just the people who happen to find you and come in your door and then you make them welcome. That, you should 100% do that. But you can go out and do it too. You can go out there and meet them where they are and let them know what you're doing. It's it's something that more retailers should probably consider. Even if it's not you, you don't have to physically necessarily go visit the place. You can hook things up via phone call. But putting in a little bit of legwork in that sense and creating those connections outside of your business and outside of your industry, humongously valuable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And maybe you do it once a month, or maybe you have a staff person do it once a month. Maybe you ask a particularly enthusiastic customer to go out and do it once a month, right? So it's hard for a sole proprietor, of a business, of a store to do this, but there are maybe other ways to make it work, or to make it work occasionally. And as someone who's now creating a Jewish culture game, I'm creating a humorous culture game based on Black Card Revoked. Ours is called Jewish Card Revoked. I will just say that I have found that there are some stores I'm surprised are connected to their local Jewish communities. And because of that, they'll be able to sell my game, whereas a lot of stores won't be able to sell that particular game, or won't necessarily want to sell it because they don't necessarily know if they can sell that many if they are not deeply connected to a Jewish community, or if there just isn't one in their area, right? But I was intrigued to hear that our retail partner, Crazy Squirrel Game Store out in Fresno, California, is pretty connected to the Jewish community in Fresno, California. I didn't know that there was one out there. And it was also not as surprising, but really neat to hear that a game store owner, Laura Schneider, at Meeple actually does events with bottom bar mitzvah kids, and she brings Wing It. She said it's hard to get them to play something besides Wing It, which again was like really touching and kind of gratifying to hear. But also it means that she has people who know about her store who are Jewish, who would probably be interested in a Jewish culture game. So that's another thing, is once you are also attracting a diverse customer base, it could help you sell a game like Black Card Revoked or Jewish Card Revoked or Latino Card Revoked they also have, and Gay Card Revoked. So, it diversifies your games as well if you are able to sell games to more people of more backgrounds.
As the longer we have talked, it feels like this is a all-stars name drop of people who've been on the podcast in the past. Like, I know all these people. I've talked to all of them at some point in the last few years.
That's funny. Well,
small world.
Sure. And Tom, I will hope that enough new retailers or newer retailers, or maybe retailers who aren't doing all of these things already, will listen in, because I want people to find something useful out of the podcast today. And I was a little nervous because you've talked to so many retailers that maybe I wouldn't necessarily be able to offer anything new to folks. But hopefully newer retailers will listen in as well, and maybe even hear some tips.
Well, there's no harm in going over some old wisdom, even if you've heard it before. It's always good to get a refresher. And yes, I definitely hope one of the things that I would like to do, and it's hard to do because it's almost impossible to reach people in this kind of situation, but if you're a new retailer, or if you're somebody who's like, I think I want to open a game store, and you're in the planning stages, getting in front of them and kind of like, okay, don't make any of these mistakes, do all these things, like trying to help them avoid some of the pitfalls, because there's, pitfalls with any new business, but there's a lot of ways to screw up a game store, and that can really mess up your life. So those are the people I'd like to help the most, ideally. I'd like to help people who are established and, take things to the next level, or turn things around, or whatever the case may be, but especially the people who are kind of like just getting in and just getting invested. And, if you're going to put down $50,000 to $100,000 on a business idea, like, I applaud you, and I would like to help if I can, and maybe, humbly point you in a good direction, hopefully.
That's great, Tom. I like that you do that.
Oh, that's what I try.
Well, before we stray into another topic, actually, I should ask, do you have any other questions related to what I described?
I don't think so. Not right now, anyways.
No, that's great. I didn't know if you were going to jump to something new, so I wanted to just mention that in terms of diversifying your games and, your base of customers, your customer base in the store, I just thought of this idea. It's also a good idea, especially while, there are still virtual events happening, to invite diverse publishers to come to game nights, maybe even on Discord. I mean, obviously, if they're in a nearby city or in your town, they could come, directly in person once, more in-person game nights are happening. But I think, only a small number of stores are probably doing in-person game nights at this point. So while you're able to, why not bring in the person or maybe people who published Rhyme Antics, for example. Chantel is the publisher of Rhyme Antics, and that's a really neat hip-hop game. She is one of the few Black women I've met in game publishing. So that's an example of a publisher. She's a great example of a publisher you could bring in, and she's also just really animated and cool. And I don't know that a ton of indie stores carry her game, although she is in Target, which is huge. And then, also looking into who are the publishers of Black Wall Street, for instance. That's another game that I haven't seen at stores, but, you could bring in the publisher and then get people interested, and maybe even partner with leaders or groups in the local Black community to introduce publishers to your, to customers at your store or new potential customers. So that's another idea I have. I'm sure people know, but just in case anyone doesn't, Elizabeth Hargrave is, I'm sure people know the publisher, or not the publisher. Elizabeth Hargrave is the designer of Wingspan, and she has her own website with a list of Black designers, and I believe Black publishers as well. And there's also a list of women and non-binary designers and publishers. So you can use her list to reach out to people and ask people if they want to come and talk about their games. That's a tip that maybe hasn't come up on your podcast before because,
No, that's an interesting idea, though. I like the idea. Any way of getting new games. Obviously, the publishers would like to get their games in front of new customers. That's a no-brainer. So the idea of having retailers do a publisher-hosted game night, I think, is a really interesting idea. How as a person thinking about it from the other side of things, what do you think the odds are of publishers being open to the idea of investing that kind of time for a particular retailer?
I think the odds are pretty high, especially right now for especially smaller publishers. But, in general, even a publisher who's had the success of, the woman who published Romantics, I think that this is still appealing because you get so few chances now to do demo nights, and expanding the customer base to be more diverse at a game store and expanding the diversity of publishers represented at your game store are both appealing propositions for people, on both ends of that relationship. So I don't think it would be a question even. I think it would be pretty easy. I am Molly, who runs Flying Leap Games, and I will personally offer to reach out to publishers on behalf of game stores if they want support and just, making the personal connection to some publishers I know. I actually got in touch with Brilliant or BS, well, the company and the people who made the game, Brilliant or BS. That's Camellia Weathers and her husband, Nick. She's the one who made the game, but he also works for the company. I got in touch with them over Instagram because I was featuring Black designers and Black publishers, and I ended up having a lot to learn from them. They wanted to learn about, how to get into retail for me, and they actually ended up coming to Gamma this year for their first time. Well, they're examples of people who have had a lot of success with their first game, but they haven't been in a lot of retail stores yet. And, that's a way that Gamma is a platform for connecting, more diverse array of publishers to designers as well. So just another thought there is, obviously people know to attend Gamma, but, ask the people you meet at Gamma to come do game nights and just see what they say. I mentioned diversity of the game store and diversity of types of gamers and having diverse types of game nights. I also realized in describing some of those topics early on that I wanted to make sure to mention a topic that came up for me the last day or so when I was, just mentally preparing for this interview, that it's important to also make sure your store itself has diverse offerings in fairly high percentages. So this isn't a new idea because I did some digging into your old blog post and saw that this idea has come up before, but I can't emphasize it enough and just want to make sure it's, included here too, just in case people don't get to the blog post or other interviews you've done, that it's so important to make sure you're carrying a fair amount of board games, that you go pretty deep into different areas. Like I've seen a lot of stores that might have one or two of each type of game. That's fine. Again, there are many ways to be successful, but this is something I'm getting partly just from seeing some of the bigger stores out there and what they offer. And honestly, I'm getting it mostly, just to be totally frank, mostly from discussions I've seen among retailers about how dependent certain stores are on trading cards, for instance. There are some trading card stores that I visit, and I know when I'm inside that they'll probably order, 1 to 4 copies of Wing It. That's okay, that's fine. I need those stores to be part of my network too, in addition to stores buying 6 or 12 or even 24, units of a game or games overall. But it's while it's important for me as a publisher to have those connections, it's also important for those retailers to know that sometimes, the market might not be as good, right? And I think people do know that, and people could see when the market hasn't been good, oh, it's really good not to be dependent on this. I have heard of stores through the grapevine. I don't want to act like I'm the person who's the expert on this, because I'm not. I'm just getting this information from retailers. I've heard of stores that might be even, say, 70% trading cards in terms of, I think, sales, not inventory. And I've heard someone who's a successful retailer in my network, and I'm not going to mention it just because I don't want people to, judge this particular person's success, but he has told me that he, I think, is roughly 25% in 4 different categories, one of them being board games. And I'll just put out there, I'm not trying to just, promote board games because I'm a game designer and publisher. Obviously, I want people to carry more board games for sure, but it does help expand your customer base. And also it means that if one category is suffering, if one category isn't as valuable at a given time or as popular at a given time, then it's good to be big in that category. So again, an obvious point, if anybody is carrying Pokemon right now, congratulations, because I know that has been huge and doing really well. And it's definitely a great time for certain kinds of trading cards. I'm not sure about all of them, but certain kinds. So I know that there are times when you really want to have more trading cards as a bigger part of your sales. And that's great. At this time, having it as a bigger proportion of your revenue and with as valuable as they are makes a lot of sense. But again, I want to say with humility, still as a publisher, not a retailer, that it's just so important to diversify your offerings.
Again, I feel like I'm probably going to say this a lot. I agree. The
Yeah.
idea of diversification is obviously really important. I think it's like a good way to think about it is, like an investment portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so not everything's going to do well all the time. Some things there's going to be a roller coaster and up and down, and you don't want all your eggs in one basket and have that thing just crash to the ground, right? Because like Pokemon's doing great now, but what happens in 6 to 12 months from now when maybe it's not doing so great? And if that's 70% of your sales, like somehow, if that's the case, then that 70% is gone now, right? Then what do you do? Right? Whereas if it's only 10, 15, 20% and you've got all the rest of your business in board games and other, offerings, then okay, that goes down, that dips, but that doesn't mean you're out of luck. That doesn't mean like you're verge on bankruptcy or anything like that, right?
Right.
Why you have to get off the roller coaster if you want to like make it long term, because all it takes is one bad, for some businesses, all it'll take is one bad month or one bad extended period, like a year, and your cash cow suddenly dies, and that's the end of your business. So you can protect yourself and your business by doing that, by offering a few more things and expanding the kind of customers that you serve.
Definitely. And I want to mention that this is probably obvious for many retailers, but somewhere between 20% of your sales for Pokemon or trading cards in general and 70%, there is a magic number for your store, and you'll know based on your population. Obviously, in cities like Indianapolis or Phoenix or Salt Lake City, there are so many game stores that I understand there's probably a benefit to specializing a little bit in a city like one of those. At the same time, just knowing that more people will come into your store if you have more offerings is clearly an important part of doing business. So, and I don't want to retail-splain retail to retailers. I feel like that was definitely a risk for today, but I learned this from watching retailers post, and I have been aware that, with Wizards of the Coast, I think being, the source of Magic, I've been aware that, even depending on one company for a big part of your business could, in the long term, be a risk. Hopefully not, but just because you don't know, it's good to diversify. So just so people know, I am the choir. In terms of speaking to the choir, I actually found that during the pandemic, part of the reason we've had a tough time financially at times is that we make party games that are for 4 more people. We only make games for 4 more people. So I thought about expanding to games for 1 or 2 people. I didn't really want to expand to, necessarily 2-person or solo player games. But with the vaccine coming out as soon as it did, as quickly as it did, that good news led me to feel more comfortable developing the new games I'm coming out with. So the 2 we have coming out this year are still for 4 more people. 1 you could do it with 3. But my point kind of being that I understand what it means to not have, a diverse array of types of games, and then to realize with a pandemic hitting, who would have expected it, right? I certainly didn't. That, that it definitely made it harder to sell to some stores because they were suffering in their sales of party games. So, I've been there. If you've experienced this problem of having less diversity of offerings, I can empathize. I get it. And I've been in sort of, just a waited out mode. But, at the same time in December, we also had our biggest sale ever from a Canadian distributor. So it's been sort of up and down in terms of how that's been to have only party games as our offering right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I think that you should have a broad set of offerings, but if you are niche down and you are that kind of a store and you want to be in that store, there's still ways of diversifying within the niche, right? So you don't want to just be the Magic store. Like if you're the trading card game store, there's more than one trading card game. Like there's plenty of different, there's the LCGs, there's all kinds of different versions that you can expand on and still essentially do the same sort of expertise and specialization, but still give yourself a little bit of a buffer in that, you're not all relying on a single game and a single product and a single company to take care of your business. Like as great as Wizards is most of the time, there have definitely been periods during the life of Magic the Gathering where it has been terrible. Like
Oh,
just the
really?
game was terrible. The sets were terrible. Like it all just fell apart, and they recovered over time. But like I said, 1 year can feel like forever if you've got that really bad dip in things. But if you're not 100% relying on one game to make it happen, you're not going to suffer as badly as you could. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like the idea of specializing is totally viable. It's like just look at Star City, right? Star City's it's known for Magic. It's pretty much the Magic store probably in North America, definitely in the world, probably. And they roll with it, but even them, they've got other things going on besides just selling Magic cards, right? There's other things happening, and I think learning or taking a page from that book is a good lesson.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know. I had never heard of Star City, so now I'll probably want to Google them and learn about them.
Star City Games? You don't know Star City Games?
I don't.
Okay, well, as a Magic player, you're like, how could you possibly not know Star City Games? But that's okay. As a board game publisher, that makes sense.
Well, I'm not a Magic player, but also, I mean, I'm fairly new to the industry still, right? I mean, I've only been running this company since 2017, and I've never played Magic. So that tells you something about just what I would know. So that displays my own lack of knowledge. There we go.
Well, now you have someone else to check out.
Yeah.
Actually, I did an interview with the owner of Star City a while back, Pete, and yeah, he has a lot of interesting things to talk about because his business is, like I said, it's more than just Magic. It's like a media empire inside of Magic now. They're pretty much the name in terms of content and video and like all that stuff and like events, right? Like the Star City Games tour, the Open Series, was as big or it was the main competitor to Wizards' own Pro Tour, their own organized play program. They were the other wing, basically. So yeah, homework if you ever want to check it out. That's
Yeah,
that'd be
no,
a reasonable place to start.
I will definitely do that homework. Thank you. I'm going to be Googling them. And what was the name of the person you mentioned again? What was his name?
Pete Hofling.
Pete Hofling. Interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks, Tom. See, I learned something today too.
So what was the next bit of advice? We've been kind of circling around those first two. We
Right. Well, I wanted to zoom way out and just say something that might seem really obvious to many people. And yet, because it's so important, I feel like it's worth saying. The common threads among game stores include common threads among game store owners and managers. And what I have noticed is they're just really often warm and welcoming and friendly people. There are a few indie game store owners who are, big and, tough men. And sometimes I get a little bit intimidated. I get intimidated by some of the women game store owners too. And I'm pretty outgoing. So I thought, well, probably other people are intimidated, but they're really nice, welcoming people still, of course. And I think that that's part of, the answer to a final question you had mentioned in questions you had shared with me previously about the best way to create relationships in this business. So much of creating relationships is just being warm and welcoming and friendly and, putting yourself out there. I mean, I guess the way that we actually created a relationship was I think we met at Gamma either in I don't remember if it was at my booth or at the bar, but wherever it was in that room, we just kind of chatted. We'd never met before. And I found out what you do, and I thought, oh, well, I visited 275 stores or so, about 250 of which were game stores. So I feel like I have something to offer. And I was a little nervous about that, but then I thought, no, I'm just going to go for it. So I think that, not to say like I am the example, but I have seen a lot of examples of people in the business, and I'll emphasize this a lot, much more than myself, that, just emphasize that really represent what I'm saying here, that really, not to be too emphatic about it, but who really exemplify. That's what I was looking for. A lot of people who really exemplify what it means to just, be that warm and welcoming person, whether to me as a publisher or to customers coming into your store. And I try to, adopt this mentality when I'm demoing in a store, when I'm about to demo or when we're wrapping up a demo, that the customer is always the most important person there. So if they have a need, I make sure to give the out. If they don't interrupt the conversation themselves as the retailer, if the retailer or the customer does interrupt, I want to be the one to interrupt us. I'll say, oh, go ahead and help them. That's totally fine. I totally get it. Please help them. I make sure to pause our conversation because that customer is a human being who is in the store to potentially buy something that's really important, especially right now. And, they need to take priority. So knowing when to step back is really important. And I guess when I'm going into a store and I feel really welcomed by the store owners, which is, most of the time, almost all the time, that's a nice feeling. I don't get so nervous when I go into stores. I mean, I think, a little bit of that nervous energy kicks in, but by and large, I feel really welcome and feel like they know how to create the space I'm describing. So, that's just to say that creating a successful store, again, not to emphasize a so obvious point, but it's a lot about, like I said, diversifying your customer base and coding the store to be more diverse and diversifying, types of games. And it's also just in general about being a welcoming person, about demeanor. People know that they'll get a negative review if a customer has a problem. Not all the time, but that is something I also see retailers post about. And my favorite responses are when someone is apologetic and says, that's out of the norm. We're sorry you had that experience or whatever it is. And, sure, you might want to defend your staff and be on the side of your staff a bit. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge that that person did have a negative experience and say, we try our best to create a warm, welcoming space. And I'm sorry you didn't have that at the time. So, I like that idea of like addressing reviews to, just head on and being somewhat at least apologetic and saying that that's not who we are usually. Again, don't want to publisher explain how to do retail. But that warm and welcoming nature is so much a part of, creating a successful, great store.
Yeah, and I think the perfect counterexample, the anti-game store owner that you want to think of in your mind is the comic book store guy from The Simpsons. Like the creaky robot or something like that. That guy, the old comic book store character of the grumpy dude sitting behind the counter who doesn't want anyone coming into the store because they're interrupting him reading his comic books. Oh, no. That's the kind of person you do not want to be, right? Like that's the person who's not going to thrive in business in general, but especially in this business. Like as much, and I think this actually does touch on a little bit about one of the most common mistakes I think new store owners end up making is that they love the hobby, so they think that this is a great thing to get into and they want to turn it into a business, but then that's not a good platform to start with because as much as you love it, the business itself is very different from the hobby. Like you're selling it, you're not playing it anymore. And, pretty much every game store owner will tell you that their favorite game now is being a game store owner. Like it's not, they have no time to play games. The thing that got them into the business in the first place, that becomes very challenging to really keep in their life. So you have to be okay with that, and you have to be separated from what you previously loved, to some sort of regard. And you can't hoard it all. You can't hoard the game or can't hoard the products and feel like this is your private space. And if you approach it from that perspective, especially when you are young or you're inexperienced and you haven't really been around the block for a while, that turns a lot of people off. Right? There's a lot of people who come in. Like this is why game stores, if people do find out about them, they tend to have a bad reputation amongst the general population because somebody walks in, usually like if a family walked into, like I mentioned, Toys R Us, they have the same experience at every Toys R Us across the nation for the most part, right? You have this big retail space. It's well lit. The employees will say, how can I help you? How can I help you find what you're looking for? And you have the same general experience, but in a lot of the game stores, they might walk in with their family, look around, and realize, well, this isn't for me. And then they'll turn around because the space itself is either dark or it's dirty or it's not well merchandised in some situations, or it's just a bunch of tables with a bunch of people with their heads down and nobody says hello, or like there's a lot of instances that turn people off from this kind of a shopping retail experience. And yeah, the idea of being that person behind the counter who's not okay with having a conversation with somebody, like you're not in the right business if that's what you want to do or if that's what you think this is all about.
Right. And I've almost never seen a person quite like you described, which is a good thing. I had forgotten about that man who owns the store from The Simpsons. I used to watch The Simpsons
they don't tend to last very long. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, you have to have that outgoing, friendly demeanor, right?
Yeah. Well, it would be really interesting to see the data, but it's really hard to capture. But I would be really interested to see how many stores pop up and then disappear within the first year. Because I'm sure there's a lot. There's just this constant churn of stores opening and closing and opening and closing because people try to give it a shot, and for a variety of reasons they underestimate their ability for success, or they overestimate their ability for success, and then they quietly close up shop. And I think a lot of it will be because of those people going into it with the wrong mindset of, this is my place, my space, I'm going to run it my way. I don't really care about what other people think.
Right. That sounds like a real shame if you have a store that is focused on your own needs or specifically your own interest. Now, obviously, people have to have a passion for the products, and I have, one store owner in particular who seems less, he's just not so into party games, so since he's less into party games, he seems less intent on bringing them into a store. He had not brought in Wing It originally, and then when he did, I was actually visiting a store out in Las Vegas. When he decided to bring in, I think, just 5 or 6, I noticed later he was selling them online. I thought, wow, if he's not even selling 5 or 6 at the store, I mean, maybe he just cross-references them online automatically. But my point to say is, it does help if the store owner or maybe a particular staff person is really into your product, right? So I have definitely had places where Wing It was one of the staff's favorite games, and that obviously helps them sell the game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The person who comes to my mind when you're talking about that was Kylie Primus, and he owns Games Unlimited, and he talks a lot. He was at Gamma, and he talked about when he was on the podcast 6 or 7 months ago now, he talked about selling games, because obviously board games is his thing. That's like, he's an expert at board games, and that's how he built his business. But the idea that just because you don't like a particular style of game doesn't mean that that game isn't worth something to your customers. So like, he talked about how, maybe, like you said, like, party games are not your style, right? Maybe that's just how you feel as the owner. You just don't like party games. That's okay. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people in your customer base, in your community, who probably love party games, and I don't want to say like they deserve them, but like, you can't negate the value of a particular kind of board game or a particular kind of gaming experience just because you don't like it. You have to be okay and open to helping people find whatever they're looking for in terms of the gaming and the gaming experience that they want to have with them and their friends. Mm-hmm. Don't push something aside just because it's not your cup of tea.
Right, and that goes back to the idea we talked about, just about building community. You're building a community of so many people who are unlike you in many ways, including what their actual interests are, not just in terms of their, ethnic background or gender identity and so on, but also just in terms of their interests. So building a community for all types. That's one of the reasons that I think it would be really hard for me to have a game store, is I just don't understand Magic, and I've just never gotten into Magic at this point. But, it's really important to carry Magic the Gathering if you can handle it, keeping up with that, because, that's such a huge part of the gaming community. I do want to bring up the issue of online sales. People love building communities so much, but without having in-person events. I know that some store owners have really missed them. Some store owners have felt like, well, it's nice to not have all that time spent on running events. I know that a really successful game store owner is Kathleen from Labyrinth. Have you had her on before? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kathleen is amazing, Kathleen Donahue. And she and our friends are friendly. I like to think of her as a friend. I've actually interviewed her as well. And she is someone who I look up to in different ways. And one way is I just like how she's even building community over her Facebook group. And that's another way she, kind of says out there what's really going on and how tough things have been at different times during the past year. So the reason I mentioned her is because, she really genuinely misses, it seems, having people in the store. Labyrinth posted about how much they missed having people stop by the store and have their kid with them, or, having the camp there and having lots of kids there for game nights. And so, or for gaming camp rather. So I want to mention that it's hard for some game store owners not to be able to have the kind of community right now that they have spent years creating a space for and building up. And the other side of that is the far side of interaction is the lack of interaction, right? And that's through an online sale where people just order something and you ship it. Or, you do, right, curbside delivery, or delivering to the house, or to the person's home. So I wanted to just ask you first before I mention anything else. Have many people gotten on and talked about online sales that they've shifted to? I know John Coviello.
Yes, I've had a few people talk about it, but not too many on the podcast. Not recently. It's been a lot of the discussion around online, though, especially since COVID started.
Well, since you just mentioned that a few people have, I'll just share, but keep it really brief, which I wanted to do anyway, since I know we're definitely over an hour from now.
Going long.
Yes, I just wanted to at least mention this today, that some of my most successful retailers, some of the retailers who I see as most successful, have started online stores that are very active. I know John Coviello's store is one of them, well, he already had one, but some of them have started new ones, and they started them and got them up really quickly, right? And some of the more successful ones have done deliveries far out in British Columbia and Canada. That's the retailer I work with out there in Invermere, British Columbia, is Main Street Fun and Games, and they'll post pictures of going way out in a rural area making game deliveries. So it does strike me that retailers who seem to be some of the more successful, or just I would say most successful. In fact, I would say these are some who seem most successful just because they have, seem to have a good community and a good following, and they're surviving the pandemic for one thing. But in general, those stores are able to make a shift really quickly. So they shifted to doing, again, the online stores, or just doing, personal deliveries. That seems super important to be able to pivot. And also I recognize not everybody has the staff for that. So that's where curbside comes in, obviously. But I don't need to get too much into that, because I feel like stores either know they have the capacity at this point or they don't have the capacity. But it does seem to be a common thread among a lot of stores to have that online, version of their store. So that was one thing I thought of in advance that I just hadn't gotten to yet. So even if you cut that part out, just wanted to mention it so that it was at least said.
No, that's definitely important, especially now. And it's never been easier to get your store online. Like every day gets a little bit simpler. Like there are so many ways to get a store online within the space of a weekend, that and for very little money compared to what it was like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, like John would tell you, he like set this whole thing up. He was doing this way before everyone else was doing it, or at least in a lot of cases of game store owners. And he built a lot of it, himself. Like he put the whole thing together, and he created a lot of the systems that he uses to still, at this point, he still uses. But for him, it's a huge undertaking to create that kind of stuff. Whereas now you can just create a Shopify store, in 5 minutes, you can have it set up and you can have it online in like the next 15. And then you can start uploading and you start populating and start adding, products and stuff. And you can get that thing rolling, like I said, within the space of a weekend. There's no reason for you not to do it at this point. And it's becoming more and more important in just the business world in general. Like people are being trained to buy online, right? Like Amazon's becoming more, like it's not going away, or at least it's not on the decline right at this point. More people are shopping online. More people are comfortable putting their credit card on a website. It's no longer a big deal. People aren't scared that someone's going to scam them, although it does happen. But the idea that people are more comfortable shopping over the internet and getting their stuff delivered to the door, or going and picking it up in person, is something that's not going away, and it's only getting bigger. And there's no reason not to get your store to online and get a part of that. Get in on the action, because like I said, there's very little cost. There's only a little bit of investment in terms of time, and depending on how many SKUs you got. But generally speaking, it's relatively easy, and it's never been easier. So like I 100% agree. You need to get your store online. However you go about doing that, if there's other ways. There are a whole bunch of options out there, like Binder POS, and there's Shopify, and there's I can't think of all of them at this point, but there's a lot. There's a whole bunch of options that you can definitely take advantage of, and for almost pennies compared to what it would cost to pay a developer to create a website for you.
Yeah. Well, and having used Wix and Shopify, my co-founder and I at this point have used both kinds of stores. I can definitely recommend both of those as options. So for anyone who doesn't have a store, I know Shopify is pretty standard. Wix worked just fine for us too. But we shifted to Shopify just because we were advised to do so, since it's pretty much the standard one at this point. And that was another thing, just to zoom out from what I said. as any business owner knows, ideally, if you haven't learned this yet, it's just important to be able to pivot quickly. I mean, we haven't pivoted as quickly as I wanted to on the shift to doing more B2C sales. And that's partly because my co-founder just hasn't been able to work with the business recently because of a health crisis in his family. But I'll just mention that we are shifting into, hopefully in a big way, into doing a lot more B2C sales and reaching out to individual gamers through Facebook ads. So I reached out to people in Singapore, and they've done a ton of work on this. I apparently convinced them to come to Gamma last year. I didn't even know that. They'd come because of me posting on a Facebook group, but they had flown from Singapore for Gamma and for other things. And they have had so much success with Facebook ads, as have the people from Trekking the National Parks, from Underdog Games, that is, that I decided to shift a lot into Facebook ads and did a little on my own in December, then realized I needed help. So, just the takeaway there is I knew to get support from people who really had already had success and knew in a big way what they were doing on Facebook ads. So now we've advised each other, myself and the team from Lord of the Chords, which is, again, a company and a game based in Singapore, have coached each other a lot. So yeah, look for mentors, folks. I mean, as much as you can, find a mentor who's done what you want to do and see if you can make that pivot with their support. We're all in it together, yeah, y'all. I mean, that's really important. We're all in it together.
Yeah, and we don't have to compete. That was probably one of the best pieces of advice I got from somebody when I was really young in terms of business. You don't have to compete most of the time. You don't have to compete. You don't have to try and undercut. You don't have to feel like you're on opposing teams. Even if you are directly in competing businesses, two game stores in the same city, you can still cooperate. You can still work together. You can still find a way to collaborate and do mutually beneficial things so that both of you succeed. You don't have to hurt the other person in order for that to work. Yeah, the idea that you can learn from other people who've done what you want to do or have a different skill set than you. Like maybe not like they don't have to be exactly in the same industry as you. Like you said that like theoretically you could have learned how to run Facebook ads from somebody who wasn't a game publisher, right? Just somebody who's like, I figured it out. I know how to write the ad. I know how to schedule the post. I know how to do the audiences and all that fun stuff. Look for people who don't have. Look for people with a different skill set than you, and try and find some way that you can be valuable to them. I think that was a theme of my interview with Brenda and Porrick from Nightwatch Games too.
Oh.
They have a very complimentary. They have a really nice store, a fantastic looking store. Aesthetically, it's beautiful, but they're a husband and wife team, and they have, like you said, like they're the yin and yang. Like he's the dreamer and she's the grinder. She's the one who knows the numbers and puts in the work, and he's kind of like, I've got the vision and I have a big strategy, and we make it work together. And the idea that you can kind of find someone who fits that puzzle piece for you. And definitely agree and think that's a great idea. Find mentors where you can.
That's so important. I was thinking that's so important what you said, particularly about you're not a competitor. I mean, literally in cities where they're 10 or 20 minutes apart, they are competitors, but hopefully they can still go into each other's stores just to learn from each other, even by looking around a game store. Not everyone has the ability to visit 250 stores, I realize, but you can definitely go into game stores when you're on vacation, visit another store an hour, a few hours away, and see what feels welcoming in a space, like what physically feels welcoming, what emotionally feels welcoming when you just walk around a store. So I really like what you said about finding mentors. I mean, just like I had mentioned before, but also what you said about, there's someone who's done what you're trying to do. It's okay to walk into their store and learn. Hopefully you're learning from each other, right? Even
if there's a store that's like down the street from you, 10 units away, they're doing the exact same thing as you. There's still an opportunity for you to cooperate, in that you can say, okay, what are you doing on Wednesdays? Okay, you're doing that. I'm going to do something that's not that. I'm going to do something that's a little bit different and attracts a different group. And I'm going to, try and I'm going to bring in the 40K players on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I'll do the Magic and you can do the 40K on Thursday, right? Like you can still work out a way so that you're not trying to actively step on each other. Mm-hmm. Even if you are like literally as competing as you could possibly be. If you're in that situation, there's still opportunities to cooperate.
Oh, definitely. And I feel like hopefully this is true for retailers too, certainly within publishing. I feel like no one is too small to learn from. And I feel like no retailer is too small for me to go visit or to build a relationship with. I have a retailer who doesn't order a ton of games at a time, and we have a pretty tight relationship now. We must have talked for like over 3 hours the other night. But we had started out talking because he runs a Facebook group that he wants me to put a post up in about one of our games to do a giveaway. It's a Facebook group about weird secondhand finds, so I didn't understand how it was related, but he just wants us to offer to do a giveaway based on pictures people post of penguins in their house, anything with a penguin on it. And so that's really cool because our first 2 games have penguins on them, right? So it turns out he runs his Facebook group with over 2 million members. Well, he's a fairly small customer, but first of all, everybody's important in their own way. And second of all, he's offering me this huge opportunity. So I want to be really clear that nobody can ever be too small or should ever be too small for you to become friends with and build a relationship with. And even if you're not convinced about that from just a human relationship perspective and an emotional perspective, you can definitely be convinced about it from a business perspective. Again, I've learned so much from friends who have made one game or a game in an expansion. I've learned a lot about what they're doing better. And frankly, a lot of people have other jobs or full-time jobs besides what they do. I don't. I'm not at the point yet where I'm earning a sustainable income from my work and, might have another, job, hopefully at some point in the near future. But what I realized was I was able to do so much and learn so much about getting into retail, partly because I was earning so little and taking this, financial risk, this flying leap into full-time entrepreneurship. It is flying leap games, right? That was a line. Just want to make sure people knew that was a line. So I took this flying leap into entrepreneurship and I visited all these stores because I could. But if people want to learn other ways to get into retail, I do have a piece that was recorded by Gamma, a workshop that actually we have one that has me in it, a recording, and then one that doesn't have me in it. So if people want to find that, they can reach out to me, just flyingleapgames at gmail.com. But what I'm saying that for is that there are lots of ways to get into retail besides going and visiting all the stores. I mentioned Gamma. There's also a cold call mini project I did or mini experiment I did. There's also just walking into stores when you're on vacation. There's, like you said earlier, it's something I haven't explored a lot, which is doing referrals, actually asking stores to spread the word on your behalf. So the point being, you don't have to be full-time to get into a few hundred stores. And look, I know a small company that's in thousands of stores. I would love to be in thousands of stores. So we still have a lot of growing to do. And part of that is B2C, getting into, these Facebook ads as a way to sell directly to people who have ideally 4 more people in their home. But also we're looking to expand into Target, and we're partnering with a much bigger company to see if they'll end up pitching us to Target, which they would like to in the near future. So just finding partners who can teach you the things, who can do the things that you don't know how to do yet, again, is super important.
And hopefully we can get you in front of some stores and we'll get some drum up some interest and getting Wing It and the other games in the line in that business too.
That sounds great.
You never know. You never know who you end up working with or who you end up connecting with and what the relationship ends up turning into later on.
Definitely.
You never know.
Well, thank you, Tom. Any final thoughts or questions? I know we've gone well over the hour both of us probably expected, and I hope you haven't missed your dinner here. But if you have any questions you wanted to wrap with or comments you want to wrap with, that's your thing.
Sure. I've got a couple questions. But yes, first of all, thank you very much for giving me your time. Like you said, this went on a lot longer than we originally anticipated. But sometimes it happens, and that's cool. It was fun talking to you. I really appreciate it. So I'll start with the question that I usually ask people on the show, and because the general topic is success, and the success is really subjective and nebulous, and the term itself means a lot, right? So what success means to somebody might not be the same thing to someone else. So my question to you would be, what does success look like for you in terms of Flying Leap Games?
Wow, that question is particularly relevant on today, a Friday, 1 week after I saw this same topic come up on Clubhouse, the all audio app that I'm now really actively on and promoting in the game community a lot. So the question was, what is success? Is it money? Is it happiness? Well, so I'll be honest. First of all, it's just enjoying what you do. I kind of came up with that on the spot, but I do think that's a big part of it. You want to, ideally choose a career where you don't have to enjoy everything. I mean, there are parts of my job that are really hard to get to, like, getting those final ads up or whatever it is. But if you enjoy connecting with people, if you enjoy making games, which I do, And if you enjoy making people laugh, I really love that part of my work, then that's part of success. Just enjoying some of the major parts, at least, of running my company is indicative of success. I think veering away from viewing money as part of success, at least early on, is part of, changing your framework of mind a little bit in our culture, at least. And so, I don't earn a lot. I'm not, earning close to what my friends from business school are, but I'm building up a company, hope to probably sell it off in a few years since I have other, paths I want to pursue. But I feel like right now it's okay to say part of success is taking a hit early on in your, financial, well-being, and taking a risk when you can take it. I don't have kids yet, so it's easier to take that risk. And, being willing to do that is part of success. Being willing to jump in and take risk. I guess, not to toot my own horn, but I think that's part of my success, is that I was willing to go on these big trips and do it the scrappy way and visit, again, over 250 game stores. So 275 with other kinds of stores in there. And I'll just say that part of success is also being willing and able to learn a lot from other people and then adapt those lessons and make changes in your business based on those lessons. That leads you to success, but it's also the recipe for success, is learning from other people. And then this is one that came up almost right away for me somehow when you mentioned, you're trying to ask, what does success look like? I think it looks like recognizing what you've learned and how to convey that information and who to convey it to, enough to pass on the lessons you learn. So in other words, the big picture here is part of success is doing what you're doing with this work that you're in right now. And what I like to do off and on with publishers who reach out to me or who I reach out to is to pass on the lessons, pass on the wisdom, if you will. So again, part of success is helping other people. And since that sounds a little patronizing, I don't love that phrasing, part of success is empowering other people, is supporting other people in being successful. Finding the small publishers on Instagram, finding them at Gamma. Thanks. I kind of came up with it on the spot when you started talking about what is success. And but I do really believe it's true. And I think that that's part of what makes me feel good about my work, is that I'm able to have somewhat of a bird's eye view and say, here are the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of how to do what I have done. I mean, I think that's partly why when I did what was going to be about a 45 or 50 minute presentation last year, it started about 10 minutes in, I think, due to technical issues. And we ended up going about 90 minutes last year at Gamma. And that's what the presentation I mentioned that is recorded. Part of why that went so long is I just let everybody ask their questions, but also because I'd done something people wanted to figure out how to do, which is getting into, a few hundred stores. And I do think there's something to these trips that I've done that people can replicate for pretty low budget. It is harder with a full-time job, but you can, again, combine it with going on vacations or smaller trips or game conventions. I always say, try to stay a half day later or a day later and visit stores in the area. So there are ways to do it at smaller scale. I don't want to say you have to go out and do this, but I think what I've done is part of success, is saying I want to get into retail and then figuring out how to do it and doing it, setting a goal. Now I would say, we need to grow partly because, it's a financial struggle at times, especially during a pandemic, but it's just a financial struggle at times for me and for the company. And that's where I recognize, okay, I have a lot to learn from actually publishers who have one game in expansion, really 2 games out, because they've done big things in the B2C area. And I found out how they did that. And then I want to try to replicate what they've done. So again, that's the part of success I mentioned, that's learning from other people. So that again will hopefully lead me to more success. Maybe in the future, maybe in several months or a year, I'll be on your podcast again and speak about how I found success in a new way. And I hope that I have that knowledge to share. Yeah. So I feel like I'm going into many types of success and many ways that you can illustrate success. But there are various areas of our lives. One is helping others. One is succeeding in the goals that we set. One is just being happy in what you do, and those are all different ways to be successful. It almost seems like I'm getting a bit corny here, but this is all true, that, enjoying what you do. Some days I really love it, some days it's really hard. It's been really hard to dive back into, that direct to retail sales. I do a lot of calls, and it's been hard to get back into that recently. But, now that things are picking up again, especially I think as more people get vaccinated, since I'm post-Gamma, I have more connections here. I do want to dive back into that. And that's building on current success, right? Building on success that we've had in retail. and trying to get the word out about, our newest game, the $1 Million Doodle, and our 2 games coming out, and seeing if I can try in a big way, hopefully in a big way, not just a little way, in a big way to replicate the success of Wing It to some extent with the other games that we carry and will carry in the future. So, but you know what? This business is a struggle and it's an uphill battle. I just want to empathize with anyone who is having a hard time getting into retail or having a hard time building up any of their sales channels, that it's a struggle. And myself, but also we as the other publishers, we're here for you. We're here to help, and we're here to support each other, and we'll learn a lot from each other. And that's part of being successful, is just, giving back to the broader board game community.
Good answer. Good answer.
Thanks, Tom. That was a lot I just said.
No, I think it keeps in with the spirit of the question, because success, like life, isn't a single race where you hit the finish line and you won, right? That's not how it works. It's like, I don't even say it's a series of races, because that's one after another. It's like a million parallel races, and you're in different versions of different things, and you might be succeeding in one area and failing in another. And like the idea of there's a lot of business owners, and it's very common in entrepreneurship, especially, for people to like dive into their business and really put a lot of work and effort and sweat and tears and do really well there, and then have their life fall apart because they've wasted all their time, or they put so much of their life in the one area. And then I feel like that would be an ultimate overall failure, is that if your family life, it deteriorates because you spend all your life at work, I would say that's not a good thing. So the idea that there are different ways of succeeding, there are different methods of measuring success, like there are different goals that you're trying to achieve. Like I think that it's all part of the overall vision of what you're trying to go for. And I think you're trying to do the good. I think that's probably what's the good, what you're trying to make the world a better place, and how you're doing it is by making people happy. I think that's a reasonable way to go about doing it. And I think that's a reasonable way of thinking about it. And so I was going to ask if you had any like closing wisdom or parting words of wisdom for the listeners, but like I think you dropped like 10 little gold nuggets of it there over the last few minutes. So
thanks. I really like what you just said. I was just going to say that I really like what you said about making people happy. I didn't even think about including that. And that's part of success too, is making sure our games are making people happy. And I feel like when we do get reviews, that is most of the feedback we get, that people are enjoying what we create. So that's really important too. Games are a great vehicle for international and just personal and general connections.
And I think I've said that before at some point in the past on one of the episodes, that game store owners should be super jazzed and pumped about what they're doing, because you're literally selling happiness, and like ethical happiness. You're not selling cigarettes or booze or something like that. You're selling games and connection and friendship and that sort of thing. And you're making the world a better place by doing it. So, and then Lynn from the Game Board would say that you're also selling, mental health as well. And you're helping people stay sharp and all that good stuff. It's just good stuff. Feel good about it. You should be pretty pumped about that. So cool. I think that's a great place to close. We're going on 2 hours.
I can't believe how much we're going, and I'm fine with it. I just was hoping that you were fine with it too.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's nighttime where I'm at now, but I've enjoyed the conversation. I always like it when a conversation goes long like this. It's usually a really good sign. So I'm glad to have had it. I'm glad I met you randomly in the Gamma spatial chat booth, and I ended up in your fondue fountain or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that worked out and that we connected and we were able to do this.
Me too. And since we're still recording, this is what I want to close the recording with, okay?
Please do.
That's okay, yeah. I was giving a tip to a friend, Kurt from Smirk and Dagger Games, or also Smirk and Laughter, about a place to sell online uncommon goods recently. And he asked me at one point, he said, "Why are you so fabulous?" Which was a really sweet thing to say. I'm almost embarrassed to share. I mean, not to brag, but he said, "Why are you so fabulous?" And I told him that, I had been given a lot early on. We'd been given a lot of mentorship from Paul from Greater Than Games and other people. And I couldn't always pay it back, but I wanted to pay it forward. And then I told him that I view us all as hiking together. Everybody in the game industry, whether you're a publisher or a retailer too. I was talking about in the context of publishers. We're all sort of hiking together, and someone gets up a steep incline first, like maybe a wall we scramble over, and I scramble over it first, so I reach behind me to pull the other person up. And then at the next wall, the next obstacle to surmount, you scramble over that first, or another publisher scrambles over that, and she or he or they reaches up to pull me up and help us up along the way. So that's how I feel. We're all kind of helping each other up, and then we reach the top of the mountain, whatever that mountain is. Maybe that's success, happiness, hopefully both. We reach that faster because we're all pulling each other up. So that's what I want to leave people with, that image of us hiking and pulling each other up together. I really like hiking.
That is a good metaphor.
Thank you.
All right.
Before
we officially sign off, where can people go to find out more about you? Do the shameless plug.
Great, thank you. That's what I really wanted to end with, is to share how to be in touch. So our website is flyingleapgames.com. You can also get on our email list there, and we send very, very occasional emails. And you can also interact with us just really directly. I'm on Instagram all the time as @FlyingLeapGames, a little more occasionally on Facebook as Flying Leap Games, or Wing It. That's a particular one, but Flying Leap Games on Facebook would be great. And then we're @PenguinSoaring on Twitter, @PenguinSoaring, because of our flying penguin on 2 of our games. So I would say where we're most active is Flying Leap Games on Instagram. And please do check out our website, flyingleapgames.com. Please be in touch directly if you ever want to email me. I'm at flyingleapgames@gmail.com. That may change in the near future, but that'll be on our website. So flyingleapgames@gmail.com. I love hearing from people. Please reach out for support. Please reach out if you want to talk about our games or about your games or about your store. I would love to get to know you, whoever you are, and make a connection with each other and chat.
All right, beautiful. And that'll all be linked up in the show notes as well on the website, so people can go check that out. If they, don't know how to spell Flying Leap Games or something like that, it'll be super easy. Just click on the button and it'll take you there.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Molly, for coming on the show and giving me your time and your wisdom and your knowledge and expertise and just putting in the effort and being who you are. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we met. I met too. I'm glad we had the show today.